welcome to Hot Topic. This week I'm talking to Martin Vickers, Conservative Member of Parliament for Cleethorpes and Immingham, and we have quite a range of issues to discuss, Martin. Thank you very much for coming along. First question, suppose it's fairly obvious. Do you hold any funds in the British Virgin Islands or any other tax havens?
If only I had enough funds to warrant it. No, I'm definitely miles out of that league. I leave that for the rich and famous.
Do you ever feel sometimes that the Conservative Party, in or out of the House of Commons, is owned by, or at least controlled by, the sort of people whose fathers do have funds in the British Virgin Islands?
Well, there are rich politicians in the House of Commons, it has to be said. I'm told, I've no idea whether it's the case, I'm told that the richest one is a member of the Labour Party. But personally, I couldn't really care as long as whether they're rich or poor, as long as they've come across their wealth legitimately and paid their fair share of taxes. I mean, the fact is, you know, if you're in the league of a sports star or TV celebrity, you tend to hand over your capital to an investor and say, do it legally, over to you, sort of thing, without getting involved. I've no idea whether David Cameron knew that his father had an offshore account, or, you know, we had to dig through piles of papers to find out whether he ever benefited from it. But the inference of your question is that, and it is an impression that our opponents try to portray as the Tories being, you know, Tory toffs from the landed gentry and born into wealth. But actually, if you analyse the CVs of the people on the Tory benches, you'll find we're a very mixed bunch, and there are a lot like me who with working class roots who bought up on council estates.
Well, you mentioned sort of sports stars and television celebrities, which is probably optimistic that they put their large amounts of capital away. But the point is that the Prime Minister, this is money that he didn't create himself. He didn't earn himself. This is money that created his father, and his father himself probably inherited that opportunity. So it's not a particularly meritocratic example, is it?
Well, don't most families hope to be able to sort of benefit their children in some way? In most cases, it's perhaps leaving the family home to their children or whatever.
And the family villa in the Caribbean.
Well, it could be, but in most cases, I suspect it's the family home at most, and perhaps a little bit of capital they may have saved, and that for most people is good, and it's good that they're in a position to pass that on to their children. Surely there's nothing wrong with that.
Why did it take the Prime Minister so long to, I think, 4 or 5 press statements? First one saying that he and his family don't presently benefit, second one that he and his family won't benefit in the future. Why did it take so long to come out with the fact after 4 press statements that he has benefited in the past?
I've no idea. I mean, I suspect that the press office were probably didn't know, and therefore were shielding him from the issues. I've no idea. Or on the other hand, maybe he's rung his accountant and said, can you find out, did I benefit? I don't know. I've no idea.
Well, he knew enough 6 months or so before he became Prime Minister in 2010. He knew enough to think it might be wise to sell up then and get his interests in.
Yeah, as I understand it, he sold all his any shares he may have had and so on, so that he was not in a position to be accused of being in the pocket of any one or other. So I genuinely don't know.
It's a little bit worrying sometimes that senior business people like Ian Cameron, a stockbroker, the Prime Minister's father, should be doing business with a law firm like Mossack Fonseca in Panama, where these papers have been released from. Jürgen Mossack is the son of a member of the SS. This is not exactly a legitimate law firm. This isn't like doing business with Clifford Chance or Slaughter and May. This is why would one choose to do business with such dodgy characters?
I mean, I just don't know. Let's be honest. You know, I've never met Ian Cameron, and I don't know enough about David Cameron to know about his personal finances. And I mean, I think the important thing is, as regards the offshore businesses, either as a country we either outlaw them completely and make it illegal for British citizens to invest in them, or we accept the fact that it is legal, and as long as people pay the due amount of tax, admittedly they're doing their best to minimise that tax, but nevertheless, as long as they pay it legitimately, it's within the law. But I think the important thing that comes out of this is that the state, the government, has a contract in effect with the people in terms of taxation. You pay a modest amount of taxation, and we will provide a reasonable level of services in terms of health, education, and so on. And I think what stories such as this do is they sort of weaken that bond between the governors and the governed, and I think that's damaging to our society and the way we govern ourselves. And you know, I make no bones about it. If you know, people should pay their fair whack on when it comes to tax, and but you know, we can only, again, I mentioned British citizens. Of course, what would happen then is people would find out a way. They'd find someone who wasn't a British citizen to invest their money. There will always be ways around these things. Governments can only do so much. We need to make sure that HMRC have got the resources to track down these people and chase them and hound them as much as possible.
I mean, this is possibly a soft ball I'm bowling you here, but how do you respond to Jeremy Corbyn's suggestion that these far-flung outposts should be taken under central government again and governed once more, the old empire governed once more from Whitehall? It's a little surprising from the Labour Party that they should be such rampant imperialists.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, what we would, of course, be destroying the economies of lots of these sums. Some of them are very close to home, like the Isle of Man. You don't have to go to Panama or the Virgin Islands. We've got these on our doorsteps. We can legislate. We do apparently have the nuclear option of being able to legislate and overrule these self-governing territories.
Well, but we do it to Northern Ireland from time to time.
Indeed,
so it should be
but but initially you look to their governments to manage their affairs. Somewhat bizarrely, I was reading in the paper yesterday that Virgin Islands residents are actually EU citizens.
Do they get a vote in the referendum, do you think?
I've no idea, to be perfectly honest, but it's a bizarre arrangement, and one that will clearly be looked at as a result of this news story.
I want to come back to a wider point that might be highlighted by this. You mentioned that relationship between the governed and the governing and the proportion of tax you pay. You said a small amount of tax. It's an enormous amount that we pay in tax in this country.
Indeed, yeah.
Vast. I mean, if we pay, say, now only 18 or 20% of capital gains tax, about 20% on an average income of income tax, another 20% on VAT every time we buy anything, and so we're in a lifetime's work, the value we create, we have about 80% of it taken away by the government. So do you think that's a massive overtaxation for a conservative, capitalist, individualistic government?
I mean, I'm in favour of low taxation for everyone, and the first staging post of that is to reduce the taxations on the less wealthy, and that's actually what the government's doing by virtue of increasing the tax-free allowances and so on. But as a member of Parliament, just like the other 649 MPs, I am constantly being lobbied about we want more money spending on schools, roads, trains, whatever it happens to be. And governments have the very difficult job of drawing the line as to how much taxation people are prepared to pay. We're hovering around what people will accept. And if we want better services, we've either got to have more taxation. Yes, we can have leaner, more efficient government, and there is still plenty of ways to deal with, but it's not, you know, it's not going to change the world. You
say how much people are prepared to pay in tax. We can talk about in a moment. We'll talk more specifically about the budget, but how much people are prepared, how much people will accept. Well, it's not a matter of whether we're prepared or how much we'll accept, because if we don't pay it, we'll go to prison, or we can try to pay it somewhere else in the Caribbean where it seems a little cheaper. Well,
yes, if you're in that fortunate position, you can. But you know, let's be honest. Saving taxation, you can buy an ISA. That is a way of reducing your tax liability. That's perfectly legal, legitimate, and thousands of my constituents have got that, quite rightly so.
There's a possibility in the budget that you say that tax breaks for the poorer or the lower income, but the tax breaks for the the threshold for the highest income tax and the highest capital gains tax have gone down in the last budget, whereas benefits have been cut. I mean, that seems like a contradiction to what you just said.
Yes, the budget was something of a disaster in the way it was presented, because it allowed the link between the reduction in capital gains tax and the proposed changes to the disability benefit to be sort of linked together. I opposed the changes to the disability benefits. There's no way that you can reduce capital gains tax.
I have to stop you there, but we'll come back to that in a moment. Please join us again in a couple of minutes. Welcome back, and thank you for rejoining Martin Vickers, Conservative Member of Parliament for Cleethorpes and Immingham. Martin, sorry, we were interrupted there. We're just talking about the fact that in the budget it seems that the rich benefited from the reductions in the level at which you start paying the highest rate of income tax and reductions in capital gains tax at the same time as benefits are being cut. Now, you were pointing out the fact that you oppose that connection.
That's right. I mean, it was a big political mistake, apart from anything else, to bring the two together, a major misjudgment. But the reality is that you cannot start cutting taxes for the rich at the same time as you are taking disability benefit or reducing disability benefit from some who are very near the margin financially. It was a mistake. The Chancellor's paid the political price for it, and quite rightly the government has had to reverse it. They wouldn't have got it through Parliament in the same way they wouldn't have got the tax credit changes through Parliament. They should have learnt from that mistake and consulted a little bit more widely with their backbenchers, and they'd very soon have found that there was no way they were going to be able to do that.
How often does George Osborne talk to you? I mean, you personally. How often can he get the benefit of hearing the wisdom of Cleethorpes and Immingham?
Well, I mean, you occasionally pass him in the corridor or the voting lobbies, and when you can say, George, don't do this, or more likely, George, I'm being got at because they want more money to improve the A16 or something like that. But then you have formal meetings. On the tax credit issue, I had 2 meetings with the Chancellor, one-to-one meetings, and expressing my doubts. I gave him the benefit of the doubt on the first vote because there was an indication that there would be some sort of transitional relief or whatever. But when the second vote came and no transitional relief or any changes were forthcoming, I voted against the government. And, I was one of, I don't know how many, 20 or 30 Tory MPs, I think.
But enough to lose the majority.
Yeah, enough to lose the majority, and there's no way that he'd gone ahead with it. I was actually expecting him to come forward with some transitional relief, and he actually came forward and said, we're scrapping it, which was a surprise, but a welcome one.
Well, I'm glad to hear that he consults you and that he consults his backbenchers, although he clearly doesn't listen enough. But the Cabinet itself meets every week, and presumably they talk to each other, and Ian Duncan Smith resigned over this issue.
Well, of course, the Cabinet don't get to know about the budget proposals until the day of the budget. Now, that might be a fault with the system, the process, and I think it probably is, but that's been the tradition for decades. Nowadays we're a little bit more relaxed about what are in effect budget leaks, whereas ministers used to have to resign if they even gave a hint of what might be in the budget.
Hugh Dalton had to resign in the 1940s, didn't he, for mentioning something over breakfast. Anyway, as Chancellor of the Exchequer. But Ian Duncan Smith resigns over this issue. It was clear that that measure was not going to get through the Conservative backbenchers and thus not through the House of Commons. So why did he have to resign? Why did he make such an ostentatious fuss about it?
Yeah, I think Ian is very committed to his welfare reform, and he's made that very clear, and that's been his particular mission in politics, and he's passionate about getting people back into work, giving people opportunities and so on. And he felt that although he'd been in discussions with the Treasury about the possible changes, it wasn't supposed to be, as I understand it, a part of the budget announcement. It was going to be part of a package of welfare reforms. Now, that package would not have hit the disabled in the same way as what emerged from the budget.
So George Osborne pulled the wool over the eyes of Ian Duncan Smith and welched on a deal, did he?
Well, I don't know that there had been a deal as such, but there were, again, I only know what I hear and read.
You're as close to the corridors of power as I can get my.
My understanding is that Ian Duncan Smith had not been fully consulted. He had not been told it was going to be announced in the budget without the supporting packages that he was arguing for.
His desire to sort of maintain, preserve, and perhaps increase the benefits, especially the benefits to the disabled, and not pay for that with the tax cuts to the top end. Very little that you can distinguish between Ian Duncan Smith and the Jeremy Corbyn Labour front bench, especially in their mutual capacity to do damage to the Prime Minister.
Well, I don't know about the fact that IDS wants to damage the Prime Minister. He clearly has a strong disagreement with him and the Chancellor on this particular issue. Jeremy Corbyn, I mean, the honest truth is that the Labour front bench has not got a coherent alternative to any of the economic policies of the government or the welfare reforms. They showed the fact that they were out of touch with the public on welfare reform during the period of the coalition government. And since the Corbyn era began 8-9 months ago, nothing has changed in as much as they have a ragbag of policies with no coherence to them, and they've got a long way to go if they're going to challenge the Conservatives as an alternative government. I
just want to stay with Ian Duncan Smith for one more moment, because it brings us nicely onto the next issue I want to talk about, which is the European Union. Is his resignation from the cabinet, does that make it a little easier for him without being indulged by the Prime Minister's suspension of collective responsibility, which others like Michael Gove have taken advantage of, staying in the cabinet but opposing the government on Europe? Does it make it easier for Ian Duncan Smith to campaign in his own way on Europe?
Well, it probably does. If for no other reason that he's freed from ministerial duties, and he can spend a lot more time, and he's a very welcome asset to the Brexit campaign, of which I'm an active member.
Well, there we are. This last week, the government spent £9 million on sending every household in the country a leaflet with its argument, with the government's argument for staying within the European Union. I'm going to ask a fairly question. I think I know the answer. £9 million well spent?
Most definitely not. It's outrageous. It's an affront to the democratic process. Come the middle of this month, I think it is, the Electoral Commission will nominate two groups, the Stay and the Leave campaign, as the official campaign groups, and allocate them the same amount of public money. And that indeed should be how it is done. The government, by jumping the gun before the restrictions on spending come in, are, as I say, it is an affront to the democratic process. It's one I think they'll live to regret, because I think it's greatly annoyed a lot of people who were perhaps neutral about the EU debate, and certainly I've been in Barton-on-Humber this morning doing a supermarket surgery, and I only found one person who actually wanted to stay in the EU.
I don't know if I'll get a chance to talk to you again before the referendum in June, so I'll open it out quite widely here. Your argument against staying in the European Union, what are the advantages to individuals in this country of leaving that trade area?
Well, the advantage to individuals, it's really the advantage to the country, as I would see it, an individual's benefit.
I think Margaret Thatcher said there's no such thing as society. The country is only made up of individuals.
She was widely misquoted or misinterpreted with that particular statement, and it's been thrown back at her and her successors for years. But I don't think we really want to go down that historical sidetrack. I mean, where are the expanding economies in the world? They're not in Europe. The European economies are stagnant. Southeast Asia, Latin and South America, even Northern Africa are where the markets are opening up. We need to be taking full advantage of that without being locked into our own little barrier. I mean, the EU puts up barriers to the outside, and that is bad.
We still do trade with other countries outside the European Union. We trade enormously with North America.
We trade with other countries. We need to expand that trade. Britain's position in the world has always been as a world trading nation. That's where we've built our wealth. But as well as the economic arguments, people are very concerned about the level of public services linked to the level of immigration. Now, leaving the EU is going to stop the free movement. That's not going to turn off the tap because of all the problems in the Middle East and so on. But it is going to give us control over our borders. We will be able to determine who comes in and who leaves the country. We won't have to ask the EU permission to support the steel industry. We won't have to ask the EU for permission to who we pay benefits to. It will be greatly to our advantage, and we will have £350 million a week extra to spend on our public services.
Is that, I mean, are you suggesting that the immigration question is the one that clinches it for you? Is there an economic argument outside the immigration question? Because the immigration question, the immigration dealt with separately anyway.
The immigration question is important because I think there's widespread concern about the possible future admission of countries such as Turkey and the impact that may have on the levels of immigration. People are not opposed to immigration per se. What they recognise is there have to be limits. They recognise the strain it's putting on schools, hospitals, GPs.
We'll come back to that in a moment. Thanks very much. Join us in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. I'm still with Martin Vickers, Conservative Member of Parliament for Immingham and Cleethorpes, and we were just talking about the European Union, Martin, and immigration. You were making the point that people are worried about maybe accession of new countries like Turkey, that would be a flood of what back in the 70s the Germans called Gastarbeiter, guest workers from Turkey.
Yeah, well, it's not so much the potential flood. What I'm saying is that if we leave the EU, we will have control over our borders, and we will be able to place limits on immigration into this country. People are genuinely concerned about the strain on our public services, that numbers are increasing. And then there's the security aspect. Under the present arrangement, of course, immigrants into Germany, Sweden or wherever may get EU citizenship, which then gives them free movement, including into the UK.
The security aspect, first of all, is volatile at the moment after the bombings in Brussels a couple of weeks ago. Those arrangements are likely to be flexible, to say the least. But it turns out that the terrorism that's being committed in this country is by homegrown terrorists, British subjects and EU citizens. It doesn't make any difference to their origin.
No. I mean, what I'm talking about is the fact that there clearly needs to be cooperation between the security services in the different countries, and it's been one of the scare tactics from the Stay campaign is that will break down in some way. It's in everyone's interest to cooperate in terms of security, whether we're in or out the EU. Who is our closest country in terms of cooperation and security and defence, and that's the US.
I want to, just quite apart from the security question, just to go back to migration, it's a fairly crudely nationalistic argument, isn't it? I mean, because we talked about the difference between individuals and society a moment ago. The fact is that if I'm from Cumbria, I'm perfectly entitled to migrate to Cornwall. If I'm from the Dordogne, I'm perfectly entitled to migrate to Normandy. Why is it that coincidence of the geography of medieval borders, or borders drawn at the Treaty of Versailles, that they should make a definition to where the relationship between my coincidence and my place of birth and where I can work? Why should that be any different from the boy from Cumbria going to Cornwall as it is from the boy from Ankara going to Manchester? The
problem is, and Cumbria to Cornwall is not a very good example, but Cumbria to London and the southeast is an example. Why are people being sucked into the southeast? Because it's exceptionally prosperous. And in the same way as we now have a European-wide community whereby the prosperous countries, the Western European countries, France, Germany, Britain and so on, are so much better off than the newly admitted states such as Bulgaria, Romania and so on. And clearly we act as a magnet to a young Romanian lad. We're putting up the living wage, which actually will increase the draw here. The living wage here of £7.20 is, I don't know if they have a minimum wage in Romania, but you can guarantee that it is considerably less than £7.20. Of course the young people want to come here. Good luck to them on an individual basis, and many of them come here for a few years, create wealth for themselves and their families and return home. And in one sense that's good, but they do put a strain on our public services whilst they're here.
Well, you raised two questions. Just to go back to the one I tried to ask a moment ago. Why is the lad from Cumbria more entitled to go and make his fortune in London, where the streets are paved with gold, than the lad from Bucharest?
Because yes, I suppose in one sense it's a narrow nationalistic argument, but he's a British citizen and he can move about Britain free and easy. I don't see anything wrong with that.
But if you're a European citizen, how's that different from the statement that if you're a European citizen, you can live about
we
Europe
have this
freely?
rather nebulous thing called the EU citizenship. I personally would prefer to be a British subject than an EU citizen.
Okay, well, I suppose that is a form of nationalism, then I suppose. That's what it comes down to.
Is it wrong to have a pride in your country and so on?
No, of course it's not. But I'm as proud of Shakespeare as I am of Mozart or Michelangelo, and the inheritance is
equally important
that we enjoy is European.
Yeah,
not
I love
just
travelling in
English.
Europe. I appreciate European culture, and I like Mozart, and I admire the works of Michelangelo. But that doesn't mean to say we have to manage and cater for the whole of Europe from here in the UK.
We're very cultured gentlemen. Let's move on now just to something a little bit more local to where we are, which is the future of the Scunthorpe Steelworks. And of course this is connected to the European Union. The freedom of the Chinese to dump steel into the European market. What would be your response were British to be outside the European Union to that sort of free market economics?
Well, I think the crucial thing in terms of the EU sort of angle to the steel issue is the fact that the debate and negotiations have been prolonged because, of course, as an EU member, we have to seek agreement in order to mitigate the electricity and the energy costs to the steelworks and so on. And then we have, and as regards the dumping, we have this. I mean, the reality is that even if China never produced another ton of steel for the next 2 years, there's so many million tons in stockholders' yards around the world that there is still a glut of steel. The debate about whether or not the government should have applied for additional limits on steel actually would have upped the government's argument, not necessarily mine, is that would have upped the price of steel. Therefore, our construction industry would have suffered, and that's a valid argument. What we want, of course, is a British steel industry producing steel at cost that is commercial and affordable to UK industry, so that they don't even have to consider going abroad.
Has Tata dealt with this with an open hand, as it were? I notice that one of its criticisms is that the costs are too high because of the environmental charge on the energy it uses. Now, I would work out by working out what percentage of its expenditure in steelworks is spent on energy and what percentage of that is spent on those environmental charges. That's only about 1% of the expenditure is on those environmental charges that Tata's paying. Are they playing a distraction tactic here?
I don't know. The dealings I've had with Tata have been, briefings at the Scunthorpe Works and so on. And when you talk to the union officials, for example, on the whole, I think they're fairly I don't know, what should we say, friendly towards Tata. They think they've been a good employer. And I think that's true, actually. That's the impression that I've received being at Scunthorpe and talking to ministers as well. But of course, they are losing £1 million a day, so we are told, on their steel operations here. They want to offload that as quickly as possible. To some extent, they've got the government over a barrel because they know that the government want to support Scunthorpe and Port Talbot and so on. And yet, in interviews like this, I've seen ministers being pressed, why don't you actually say that you want to do this? That? Well, of course, as soon as they say that, they're losing their negotiating position completely. So, I mean, ministers have made clear that they want to retain the steel manufacturing capacity in the UK, and they want Scunthorpe and Port Talbot to be part of that. I've only been part of the negotiations and discussions as regards Scunthorpe. The government have played a very supportive role in those negotiations, and certainly if they're handling Port Talbot in the same way as they did Scunthorpe, then I think we will have a successful outcome.
Well, the latest news I've heard is that an investment group called Grey Bull it might be investing 400 million into the plants for Scunthorpe and Port Talbot. What can they do that Tata couldn't?
I'm no expert on the steel industry. Grey Bull have a record of moving into sort of basket case businesses.
Monarch Airlines
is the most is the most recent example, and pulling them round. The important thing is that we retain. I'm talking about Scunthorpe here. It looks like we're going to retain the Long division, where they're producing the rail track and the profitable part of the businesses. Regrettably, we've had to lose some redundancies in recent months. I gather that most of those have actually, in the end, been voluntary or by agreement. There's only been a very small number of compulsory redundancies, which is good news. And I think the way that the task force that was set up by North Lincolnshire Council with the support of government and Job Centre and so on has been very successful in supporting the families and looking for alternative employment. I mean, earlier this week I was at Wren Kitchens in Barton. Now, you'll recall that Kimberly-Clark moved out of their factory with 400 odd redundancies 3 or 4 years ago. That was viewed as a catastrophe, and yet Wren are now advertising for 600 additional employees.
That's an optimistic point you make there, Martin, and we'll stop there just for a moment. Please join us again in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to the final part of this week's Hot Topic. I'm still with Martin Vickers, the Tory MP for Cleethorpes and Immingham. Martin, we've got the local elections coming up for the various parts of a third of the councils in various of our local authorities and counties and districts in the system that's sort of rather reminiscent of the United States Senate, that only parts of the council are elected every time round. The councils are completely constrained in what their policies can be and what they can do by the massive reductions in money that they've got from central government. Whoever we elect, they're really going to be able to do very little anyway. So what on earth is the point of having an elected local level of government? Well,
both under this government, the coalition government, and the previous Blair-Brown government,
I think we can apportion blame perfectly evenly across the lot. The point is that it's still the case that they can't do anything.
Emphasis from central government, whoever's been in control, is that local authorities should become enabling authorities and not providing the services directly themselves. So they contract out, they don't have to, but they could contract out waste collection or whatever. And that's a system that on the whole, since all governments have looked at it and gone with it, they're reasonably satisfied from the centre. There's been a lot of, I was going to say deadwood, which is not fair, because there are a lot of people, as I know from all my years in local government, who labour long and hard for their local authority and provide essential services to the local community. But nevertheless, I think it has to be accepted that there has been vast efficiency savings in local government over the last decade or two. and that has been proven by the results. In all honesty, as I go around, people complain about the council. Of course they do. That's human nature. That doesn't matter who's in power. But they're not actually complaining about that it's been drastically reduced. They're still complaining about exactly the same things which the council have got control over.
We were talking earlier about the relationship between those who are paying taxes and those who are taking the taxes. And the last budget, it might have seemed a little generous to those who are paying high taxes, those who are earning a lot, and ungenerous to those who don't have very much. For a lot of people, the highest tax they'll pay in the lower income brackets, the highest amount of tax they pay is the council tax, especially if you have to earn, over now £11,500 to need to pay any income tax at all now. You can still wind up paying 10% of that or more in council tax. And yet what do you get for it? An occasional dustbin emptying and a couple of broken traffic lights.
Well, what you get for it is I know the levels of highway maintenance are critical levels, shall we say, but nevertheless highway maintenance does go on. What you get for it, what are the services that are provided? Adult social care. You see, a lot of the services that the local authority provide are actually hidden in the sense that adult care, for example, yes, it affects a lot of people, but it takes place in their homes, and it only affects a relatively small part of the community, but it's essential to those people.
But the point is that if you are in that economic position where the most tax that you're paying, your biggest tax bill is the council tax, and the local democracy doesn't really work then, because there's not all that much difference that your vote is going to make in voting in a local council, because the local council can do so little, has such little autonomy from the national. So your biggest tax, you're not really there's no representation on that taxation, on that massive council tax bill.
One big change that the government has announced, of course, is actually leading to more autonomy, and that's the business rate retention, which will be phased in over the next few years. But that's not going to
be enough to compensate.
No, but there will still be a centrally distributed fund, as it were, to compensate for the poorer areas of the country.
Do you have any ambitions to be the first mayor of Greater Lincolnshire?
No. I'm very content with my current role.
Well, do you think that it's a good idea that there should be such a thing as a mayoralty for Greater Lincolnshire, as George Osborne rather inappropriately announced in a budget speech?
I'm in
favour. What's the advantage?
Well, my constituency covers both North and North East Lincolnshire, one Labour led council and one a Conservative led. Both of them were supportive of the devolution deal. Both of them came to me collectively, the leaders of both councils, and said, this is the deal that we favour. So my job was made easy in the sense that I'm in favour of devolution. Both my councils were in favour of the deal that was on offer. The alternative of some sort of recreation of County Humberside, apart from being totally inappropriate and unpopular, was not on offer because Hull have turned their backs on any of the deals that are on the table. And so we've gone back to Lincolnshire, which I think is by far and away the best option.
This devolution idea is, how far are you willing to take it? If Britain should come out of the European Union, Lincolnshire should be devolved from the Westminster government. Should we have Louth perhaps as a semi-autonomous People's Republic?
No, I mean,
how far do you take this devolution?
Well,
there's a sovereignty or there isn't.
Yeah, there is the ultimate sovereignty, of course, lies with the British government, with Parliament. If they choose to devolve certain functions down to local authorities, which they are doing increasingly, I think that's good, because it's much easier to set priorities at local level than it is at national level, because quite simply you can't get down to the sufficient detail if you're sat in Whitehall. If you devolve responsibility of that to the county level or borough level or whatever, that is a vast improvement. And with it, of course, comes additional funding.
I just want to finish with I know one of your favourite subjects, which is transport infrastructure. And the Chancellor did make various announcements about HS2 and even HS3. Is the Humber sufficiently satisfied that it's going to be connected to the Northern Powerhouse, or given the infrastructure that it needs? Is our ridiculously slow little putt-putt train from Cleethorpes to the main lines at Doncaster going to improve? How can the government be tying this part of the country more closely in with the rest of the country?
Well, improvements are being made, but not enough. The biggest example locally is the A160 upgrade into the Port of Immingham, which is absolutely vital from an economic point of view. So money is being spent here in pretty large quantities. On the rail network, we've had £100 million spent in northern Lincolnshire in December, January, when the line was closed for 10 days or so, and that's improved the signalling system, which will lead to faster services between here and Doncaster, which you rightly say is, although the trains are perfectly satisfactory, they do crawls.
They never get out of second gear.
The crawls perhaps being too critical, but they could be doing with speeding up. I go on them every week, and I know well the frustration. So HS2 and HS3 are essential for the national economy, and they will boost the local economies, the areas they serve.
Explain what HS3 is, sorry, briefly.
HS3 basically is a high-speed electrified service between Liverpool, Manchester and Leeds. What we need is faster connections, and there is too much emphasis on the Leeds-Manchester when we talk about Northern Powerhouse. George Osborne and David Cameron and other ministers have spoken repeatedly in answer to me that the Humber, both north and south, is very much part of that powerhouse, but we do need better rail and road connections in order to benefit. Travelling south from here, if you're going through Lincolnshire, as we need to do more often to go to meetings of the Greater Lincolnshire Authority, going down the A16 towards the People's Republic of Louth, or whatever you just called it, was is a bit of a pain.
Wouldn't it? I'd be more romantic than that. Call it the Grand Duchy.
The Grand Duchy, much grander and more appropriate.
So going apart from the devolution and the smaller units of government, as it were, there's a possibility that after a £12 million loss, the East Midlands ambulance service, it's not going to merge with the West Midlands service now. But clearly, that's an area where a larger organisation covering a greater area with more resources might be an efficiency of scale.
Yes, I mean clearly there are some services that have to be provided, and I accept that strategic transport planning that we just talked about is one of those, and that's going to be something that is devolved to the new Lincolnshire Mayor. But on the ambulance service, merger with West Midlands is now, as I understand it, off the agenda, but there is a possibility that they might share a chief executive. Now that's a function that has been shared among by many local authorities, and if you get someone of the right calibre, then it can work. But what is absolutely critical is that the service to the patient is what's important. We've got to get the ambulance service right. East Midlands Service has gone through numerous ups and downs during its existence, and not performed as well as some of the best performing ones, and we've got to correct that. And I'm meeting officials from the ambulance service in a couple of weeks' time.
Martin, I'm very sorry, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much. We've travelled from the Caribbean to the various sovereignties of Louth. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Join me again next week for Hot Topic. Join in on Twitter and on Facebook. Until then, goodbye.